Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook. Furniture is just the beginning. Be prepared to be inspired by a wide range of projects and finishing techniques. Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook. These particular pumpkins probably don't look too bad on the camera screen, but when you're up close to them, they are definitely very plasticky looking, and the colors are off, and so is the finish. So one of the things I want to do in this video is show you that sometimes it does not take very much at all to change up a piece of decor or an item like this for the holidays and make it look much more high-end and like it was from a very expensive store rather than something that has been collected on clearance or from very cheap stores, and not plasticky at all when we're done. So let's get started. We're going to work on these pumpkins to make them look a little bit more natural. And even though we're all used to seeing, especially in the fall, just the solid orange colored pumpkins, there's a huge variety of pumpkins out there with all different colors on them that aren't gourds, they are edible pumpkins. We just have the mass market wants the bright orange ones for the fall and especially for Halloween carving. So these are going to be a little different than that, but it will give you some ideas of what you can do with yours. If you want to use the wipes on something like this, it works great. So does the liquid. If you're out of wipes and you have liquid on hand, you can get a paper towel, squeeze it, doesn't take much there. You can get it wet, but this is definitely not drippy. There's some dry spots still in it. I couldn't squeeze it and wring deglosser out of it, but it will work just as well on something like this. I would not use this process for my cabinets. If I were going to do this on cabinets, I would use the green scrubby with the liquid. And these basically needed to be wiped down to get off handling from the store, from manufacturers, the oils from that. I bought them last season on clearance and then just left them till I was ready to start working on them now that we're coming into the fall season, because there were other projects I was working on in other seasons of the year. The paper towels also work for something like if you order the liquid deglosser and then you have paint and you're going to do a shower surround, the metal of it. This allows you to control where the deglosser is to help keep it off the glass, and even better if you use liquid masking tape along that glass. But anyway, we're going to start working on these to see what we can do with them. This has some really just straight lines down it of paint in the grooves that they tried to give some depth to it. And from a distance, it's not really bad. But up close, it's very clear that it's just lines, and the color of this stem is awful. I've got a wide range of colors sitting out, different brushes, chip brushes, the small HTP brushes, craft brushes, and I've also cut apart half of a true applicator, and I've cut it into 4 pieces. I cut the whole thing into fourths, and then I cut apart the pieces that stick together, because it's going to give me multiple small pieces to work with for what I want to do with this particular piece. And the first thing I'm going to use on it is I'm going to use just a little bit of Stonehenge. I tend to have a lot of samples on hand when they go on sale. I gather what I don't have, add to it, because the samples go such a long way. I'm pouncing most of the paint off of this because I want to get into these areas and create some shadows. Went back up, but you can see it lifted some of that off. start in opposite ends so that this was heavier on the top. This one, I'm going to go heavier on the bottom. I'll do another one of those. And I'm not trying to get them to all match because pumpkins don't have perfect stripes all over them. And Stonehenge is enough of a gris that it allows you to use it as a chameleon against different colors. It's not getting all the way down into the groove, and I'm not worried about that because the next step I'm going to do with this will get down into the grooves. And I'm barely getting any paint at all on this, and then trying to get as much off as possible. I could put a spoonful of the Stonehenge out on the plate, but it would really be a waste of my paint because all told, by the time I get this done, I will have used maybe less than half of a teaspoon of paint for this particular pumpkin. Now on this one, I've moved top and bottom to create some change in where the heavier color is. And you also want to make sure you're getting some down onto the bottom. This is such a thin layer of paint, and HTP dries so fast that I can get it on there. And that way, if this pumpkin lays over in a display, it falls over, it's not going to look unfinished. I'll wait and do that and use this one, but I'm going to lay that one to the side that I know I used that with weather vane. Now, I need a lighter color to come in here to emphasize the striping on this. So what I'm going to use for that is I'm going to use a 1/2 inch angled art brush. And I'm going to use a little bit of Tapestry. I am going to mix this on the paper plate because I need it not to be the warmth of Tapestry, but I need it not to be as white as the almond that I have out. So I'm going to mix that about 1/2 and 1/2 to get a little bit warmer white. And I don't care whether it's perfectly mixed because that will add to the modeling on this, which is the effect that I want to get. I'm going to be switching my brush back and forth like this as I pounce because that's going to give me more of a varied look on this. After you've gone down it, go back so you can get some of those striations that come out onto the veins out of this. pouncing, so as you're watching, you're not creating blobs of paint anywhere. My brush is very dry, which is why I can dip without messing up my paints. And I'm going over the top here to mute out all of those solid yellow lines that they put into this. And I'm going to put just a touch of Stonehenge over the first one I did because it's heavier than what I want. This particular coloration on pumpkins often has a blob of green on it. So I'm going to start with some Stonehenge with the sponge, and then I'm going to use a mix that I mixed for another project that is equal parts Crete, Envy, and Trinity. Again, it's very little on my brush, but that base is showing me where I want to go. I'm going to use the other side of this one. I don't have to get another piece of sponge, of the true applicator. The thing you do have to be careful with is that you don't create square ends with this. So you have to keep pouncing till you blend that so that you don't create that. Back and double check. If I had just left that, I wouldn't have seen where I had straight lines. So now that's more like a more heirloom type pumpkin, and I'm also going to use the green right now over the stem. That's not all the stem will get. In fact, it's probably going to be easier if I use brush. And the small brushes are your friend because it's too easy for a bigger brush that's not angled to get down into past where the stem actually is. And it does not have to be solid on that stem unless the color is just god-awful, because that will help create the natural variegation in the stem too. I'm looking at it, adding some more pounces of here is going to help to blend in these colors. Now this is going to dry, and I'll come back to this in just a few minutes, but I want to work on a different pumpkin while this dries and while I have specific colors out. So on this one, I want to use the green in different areas of this to help soften this fake spray that they have put on this. And then I will go into the grooves with a lighter tone, which is what these pumpkins have on them usually. Hopefully you can see there's still modeling coming through that, but it's not like very contrasty white marks. And actually, while I'm under here, I'm just going to get the whole bottom of this so I don't forget it, because that's easy to do. And the more times that a sponge has been pounced, the less likely you are, as you're working, to get any of the square tips off of this that you don't want. This could have been done with just leftover envy. It would have been close enough in tone, but I have this color that I have mixed, so barely touching that. If you have a lot out on the plate, you will invariably get too much on the sponge, and then you spend time trying to get that back off. And wasting paint. I wiped it on the rim of the jar because I saw already I had too much when I dipped that time for what I wanted to do with this. And you can see this one that I did first is drying darker, which is what I wanted. This one's still wet, but it will come into this rich tone here. I'm going to wipe that brush to grab some of the tapestry to add into this. So again, I've got a very warm white. I got a little bit more tapestry than I intended, so go back and add a little bit more almond. Now I've got the tone I want. And too much on my brush. So just clean it off with a paper towel and start working from there. Just make sure my fingers don't have wet of any color on them. If you had had a white pumpkin and you wanted these lines to be green, you could have softened the whole pumpkin with this color that I'm using in the wedges here over the whole thing, and then have come back and done a green like I'm doing this for that kind of pumpkin. And you definitely don't want to just paint up and down in these, because all that does is create very unnatural stripes. After a while of using these products, even if you don't do what I've done and collect samples over time, you wind up with extra bits of paint in the cans because you figured out after you got it that it really does go an extremely long way. And you're trying to figure out, well, what can I do with that paint? Small projects like this that don't take you long, but will give you a nice look. And I'm definitely not trying to make these sections all look the same. And if a little bit of paint gets somewhere I didn't mean it to, just blend it. Because it's going to give you, those little oopsies are what give you a truly natural look when you're finished. I'm going to use just a touch of the green on the stem, because this stem really isn't bad in the condition it's in. But I do want to get all of the plastic look out of it, so looking at it as I'm putting it on here, I do need to add more, and then I will do to it what I'm fixing to do to the other pumpkin that was just painted. Dots of paint on here. Set that one there for a minute. Bring this one back over. and use some vintage brown over this. This is the antiquing gel. I'm going across those lines so that I can get them emphasized at the raised portion of that stem, the design. It's the emphasis I want and looks more natural. I don't want a full coat on this. I'm not wiping it back. I'm just using it to highlight. I'm using this tiny brush, get it all the way down to the base of that to hide any of the plastic that's still showing. I'm adding more on this tip than any place else because that's where it should already have started drying out. Normally, antiquing gels are not applied till a base paint has been dried for 48 hours, but I'm not worried about this because I'm accenting. I'm not wiping back. I know I'm not going to have to spray this to remove anything, so I know I'm in good stead with this. If you were doing it on a piece of furniture, you would not want to do it this soon. I'm using just a touch of the brown here at the neck. Soften out any of that orange that was still bright. So now this one is ready just to completely dry. It's done. And this one, the stem needs some of the antique brown added to it. Brushing most of it off of this side of the jar, the sample jar. And just creating a very light shadow underneath this because this stem does not fit perfectly down into this like a natural pumpkin would. So now this one is also finished. This one is going to be interesting. I'm not sure how this experiment is going to work, so we're just going to see. I'm going to try to get it a super, super pale yellow because some pumpkins are that color. So I'm using Naples and Almond, and we'll see what we get here. I know this doesn't look very yellow on here at this point, but it will dry with some yellow tone to it, which is what I'm looking for. Just a really super pale yellow. And I'm also going to mist some water in this, because over this paper-mâché, I want it to act more like a glaze. Get these out of my way. Let's see what we get here. Brushes are very dry, so I'm just hitting the tops of those ridges in the paper-mâché, and a little bit is getting down into the base, but it's not completely painting it, because if I completely paint it with it, I lose all of the texture. I can add just the tiniest amount of green in a few places on this, but not even trying to get it over all of it, just enough to show that the stem still has a little bit the green to it. Because that's paper-mâché and it has soaked in so well, I can go ahead and add the white to this one. And I'm going to use the almond. I need to spray this brush and dry it out with a paper towel. If you felt better doing it, you could take this in or take it to a sink and wash it before you worked on this. But if just the tiniest amount of green gets into this, I'm not going to care. I spooned out the white for this because the paper-mâché, being paper, grabs the paint, so you use more than you normally would. By adding the warmth of almond to the yellow, I'm getting the color that I found in photos of the yellow pumpkins that look like this. If I had used pure white, like cashmere, I wouldn't have gotten this tone, and it would not have looked right for the color I needed for the pumpkin. So when you're mixing a white with a color, you need to think about whether you need that color warm or cool, and choose your white accordingly. And something like Colosseum that has gray in it will definitely alter your color to not necessarily the color you want, because gray tinges things really differently. So it's not always your best color to mix with something. If you're wanting to lighten something like polo, it works well. I don't know how well you can see the color variation on that, but it no longer looks like paper-mâché, and it looks like the pumpkins that have a ridginess and a two-tone color to them that are not smooth. And that's the effect that I wanted with this particular pumpkin. So this one's done and ready to dry. This one has a good area of orange over here on it, but then the rest of it is a brownish, greenish, really not remotely like any pumpkin really is, and this stem is really bad. So we're going to see what we can do by dry brushing some of the mix of that paint color that I had, that is the mix of Crete and Envy and Trinity that I put together for another project. I'm not going to try to completely get rid of that undertone and see what it looks like, because I think it might work for what I want. And if it doesn't, I will continue layering color. It's kind of the fun of a project like this, that it's not something vital, it's something fun, but something that hopefully will also turn out to look very nice. I'm going ahead and doing the bottom so that it has time to dry while I'm doing the rest of the sides, so that I'll be able to set it back down. But again, because this paint dries so fast and I'm putting so little on, it's pretty much going to be dry anyway. At least dry to the touch. It's not dry as in I wouldn't put it on my good furniture at this point. And you need to double check that all of your brush strokes are going the correct way. And I'm purposely not going over that orange. I don't want to take that away. I'm looking at this right now, like right there. There's a spot where my lines were not following the wedges of the pumpkin. This also had weird greenish yellow lines in it, which were not natural to a pumpkin either. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of Stonehenge into these stripes, because it will model into this green really nicely. I'm not doing it as heavily as I did some of the other pumpkins, because it does not need it. It just needs to have some delineation of those wedges to help them show up better. And again, it's just teensy amounts. You can see where that's shiny, the paint on my brush. I'm not creating a stripe, creating models. By keeping the brush really dry of paint, you have lots of control over exactly how much gets onto the pumpkin itself. Now I'm going to put green up onto this stem, and then I'll put a little bit of brown, and this will be done. This is already so dry that my gloves aren't sticking to it. This is not dry enough for me to put the antique brown on yet, so I'm going to grab this pumpkin and I'm going to add green into this. I'll add a little bit of the lighter color under it first, and then I will put green over it so that I whiten this up and get some of the green tones into it. And for that, nope, this one's solid. Here's one. Where the yellow is on here, it's dry because I took a break to let some of this dry. This is Almond, and I do want it brighter on this one because I'm putting green over it. Those multiple dips, we're working to not get very much paint onto the brush. And the more you pounce, the more you blend out and don't have uneven brush marks on it. Not always going back and looking to see where it might need some additional help. Don't need a bristle down in paint. As most of the paint is off from where I first started down here at the bottom, I can use the brush to model in the green and do some blending. Always trying to avoid getting huge amounts paint on your brush. But hopefully you can see that's creating a blended green rather than just a solid green on there, which is matching the modeling of the orange and yellow on the finish that I am not changing. And allowing some of the white just to stay white. Putting some on with dry brush, and then now coming back and pulling down through it hard with the brush. There's very little paint on the brush, but it's allowing me to soften out those lines. But you cannot work slowly doing it because it will dry too far and you won't be able to do any of that smoothing out. Put a mist of water on my brush to help me with a couple of places that the lines were not the way I wanted. So I want to reactivate the paint with just a tiny amount of water. Very little water. Again, I want to bounce that off. I'm going to use the small brush to get into this stem, put some green onto it, because it is a very, very unnatural green the way it came. press too hard right there, holding on to the pumpkin. So I needed to blend out that spot where my finger stuck. Now we'll come back to this one. And add some brown to the stem with the vintage brown antiquing gel. You could use truffle. I just happen to have this handy, so it's going to work for me. Actually, I want a little bit more lighter brown on there, so I'm going to add just a little bit of saddle onto it. And that brings a little bit of the color of that stem back to this as well. Let that dry. And I'm going to go the other way on this one. I'm going to add a little bit of the saddle into it. And then I'm going to add vintage brown. I just want to get a modeling effect into this because the stems are not a solid color. And now this one's ready to dry. I need tape for this. So they stay up out of my way. This one I think is going to get saddle put on it. I got a clean one here. Oh, I do have a clean one. Okay, it's going to take a little bit more than I thought on the brush.
One more. What was that?
This is the Envy Green mix. And a little bit of green here on the top that I don't want. So, wet paper towel took that right off of where I don't want it. And it wasn't sopping wet, just enough to get it. This is not a realistic looking pumpkin, but I really, really like the texture of it, and I like it much better than the plain paper-mâché. So it would also look nice just tossed in among the other pumpkins or sitting by itself somewhere. And this one needs to dry. And these poor little guys are Dollar Trees. And all I want to do on them is a little bit of highlighting in different areas just to bring down the harsh lines they currently have. So these should be pretty quick. Because again, that perfect stripe in there is not how pumpkins look. This is the Crete Envy mix. Oh, that red is really not the grandest red for this. So, let's see what would happen if we can glaze it. And what I'm going to do to try to do that is I'm going to put some water on the plate, a few squirts, so that there's actually a little bit of water there pooled. And then see if this will help to bring down the garish red of this. It's a little bit more pink. The water is letting me get a full coat of glaze on this, like doing a wash, which is really toning down that red. There are pumpkins that are red, and I have no problem with this red bleeding through this, but this red isn't close to a natural pumpkin. I'm going to use the solid paint without water in it to come into the grooves between all these wedges, to accent them a little bit, and to further mute down that off-color red that was in this. This spot right here is glue that I did not see, but that's going to hide when this whole thing is put back together anyway. So it really won't matter. Saddle by itself would have been totally the wrong color for a pumpkin, but using it as a glaze over this and using it into the grooves for shadow is working really well. I don't have to get over the entire bottom of this because this is a piece that sets. And I'm going to use a little bit of this saddle also to get some lines on this pumpkin. It's not an antiquing gel, but because I'm working with it fast, doing some white back on it, it's acting like one. And that allows me to control how much I want on here. If I see it's too heavy in a spot that's blending with my brush, I don't have to take it off. If I get some too much of a good thing on there, I really like what that did on that. Oh. This needs a little bit more put onto it. I'm not trying to coat the whole thing. Just muting that red some more. I do not want a full coat of paint on this. It would defeat the purpose. That dry, and then this one I'm going to add a little bit of this saddle into the center areas here. Always remember, do not go directly from the paint onto a surface that you're trying to do something like this to, because you will get blobs of paint that you can't clear out. And it's really frustrating because Murphy's there waiting for it to be the very last section you do, for that to be what happens. And you just kind of feel your stomach drop. But, like I showed you a minute ago on another pumpkin, grab a paper towel, get it wet, and wipe it off as much as you can. It'll make it easier to touch up and fix. The better part of valor is just to avoid having to fix it in the first place. And that's added just enough more texture to this without taking away the creamy yellow of this particular type of pumpkin. I'm going to let these dry, put everything back together, and we'll come back and look at the finished pieces. As I was putting the paint away, I looked at this and realized just a tiny bit of yellow in here could be perfect. So what I did was one piece of it, one wedge, because I knew I could add water to it and get it off. But this is straight Naples. I'm not putting a lot on, so the green underneath and the Stonehenge I already put on are working through this yellow, so it will never be the bright yellow that Naples normally is, because this is acting to mute it. The other colors are affecting what it looks like, because I'm not putting a solid coat on there. And that's giving a much better stripe on that. Alrighty, now I think we're done with these. One of the things I wanted you to get out of this particular video, in other videos where I've done pumpkins or other finishes, I've totally covered the original finish and moved on from there. But I wanted you to see that sometimes 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes max of your time, you can add a little bit of additional finish and totally change the way a decor piece looks, or even a piece of furniture. You don't have to do the entire thing to make some really big changes in it. So I hope this inspires you to try some of these things yourself. And if you're not sure what pumpkins look like, but you want to change your plasticky looking ones to something more, go out on Google and look at the different kinds of pumpkins. There's some really amazingly beautiful ones out there. Thanks for stopping by, and please hit that subscribe button. Thank you.